Today's lesson is over classifying quadrilaterals. These notes correspond to pages 12 through 15 in your notebook. The first page of notes just kind of shows you a couple different displays of how you can see the different relationships between quadrilaterals. So just to clarify, a quadrilateral is a closed figure with 4 sides and 4 angles. So there are many different types of quadrilaterals. We can be more specific, such as rectangle, square, or rhombus. So there are 2 diagrams below that kind of show you different ways that you can think of how these relationships are formed between these. Your basic quadrilateral, 4 sides, 4 angles. From there, you have a trapezoid. Trapezoids have exactly 1 pair of parallel sides. Parallel sides meaning that sides that would never intersect. So if these 2 sides here were to keep going forever and ever and ever, they would never ever intersect each other. They would never touch. They keep going. They're 2 straight lines that would never touch. A parallelogram, on the other hand, is a quadrilateral with both pairs of opposite sides that are parallel and congruent. So on a parallelogram, we have a set of parallel sides that are parallel, obviously, never going to intersect, and they are also congruent. They are the exact same length. Then your other side of congruent parallel sides make up your second pair. So we have 2 pairs of parallel congruent sides to form a parallelogram. A parallelogram is a type of quadrilateral. Because it has 4 sides, 4 angles, it's automatically a quadrilateral. We have different types of parallelograms. Parallelograms can be broken into a rectangle. It's a parallelogram with 4 right angles. You'll notice in this picture above, these angles are not necessarily right. Those 2 are obtuse. These other 2 are acute. Where in a rectangle, all 4 angles must be right angles. A rhombus is also a parallelogram. A rhombus has 4 congruent sides. So a rhombus is very similar to a square. 4 congruent sides, although it does not have to have the 4 right angles like a square. A square is very specific. It's a parallelogram with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. Here's another visual just to kind of give you an idea of the big picture. The whole thing is a quadrilateral, this big circle. Then we can be a little bit more specific. We have trapezoids. Remember, trapezoids have 1 pair of parallel sides. Being a little bit more specific, parallelograms. Parallelograms, 2 pairs of parallel sides. Even more specific than that, we have our rectangles and rhombuses, and then squares are in the middle. Squares can be a rectangle, because remember the definition for a rectangle is a parallelogram with right angles. Well, a square is a parallelogram with right angles, but a square is also more specific because it has 4 congruent sides. A square can also be a rhombus. Because a square has 4 congruent sides, it just also has 4 right angles. So a square can be classified as everything. It's the most specific. A square can be a rhombus, it's a rectangle, a square is a parallelogram, a square is a trapezoid, a square is a quadrilateral. So your square is your most specific type of quadrilateral. So let's practice classifying these quadrilaterals below by naming the name that best describes it. Now remember, we don't want to make any assumptions. Number 1, we see 4 right angles. I see these 2 sides are congruent, and the left and right sides are congruent. Oops, that one only has 1. Making this a rectangle. Number 2, the only thing that I know about number 2 is that it has a right angle. I don't see any symbols telling me there's parallel lines. I don't see any symbols showing me that there are congruent sides. So the only thing we can say about this figure is that we know it's a quadrilateral because it has 4 sides. But we can't be any more specific than that. Number 3. Number 3, I see a congruent sign and a congruent sign, 1 dash for each. And then I see a parallel sign, 2 for each. So that pair is parallel and congruent. Then I see 2 dashes, making those 2 congruent, 1 arrow, meaning they are also parallel. So what type of quadrilateral has 2 pairs of parallel lines and congruent lines? Good, a parallelogram. Number 4, all 4 congruent sides. So I know you probably automatically want to think a square, but remember, we can't make any assumptions. We don't know that these angles are right angles. So we can call this a rhombus, because a rhombus has 4 congruent sides. We cannot call it a square because we do not know that it for sure has 4 right angles. Number 5, we see congruent lines, but we don't know anything about anything being parallel, so we can only call this a quadrilateral. It has 4 sides, we know that, so we know it's a quadrilateral. And then the last one, number 6. I see congruent lines, but I don't know anything about whether they're parallel or not. We don't want to make any assumptions. So the best way that we can describe this shape is a parallelogram. Oh, I'm sorry, a quadrilateral. I'm just going to abbreviate on that one. All right, determine whether each figure described below can be drawn. If not, explain why. So let's think. Can we draw a quadrilateral that's both a rhombus and a rectangle? So let's draw a rhombus. 4 congruent sides. Now, can a rhombus be a square? Because a rectangle, remember, has to have 4 right angles. A rhombus does not necessarily have to have 4 right angles. A trapezoid with 3 right angles. A trapezoid I can draw with 2 right angles, but the other one would have to be slanted. So no, I could not draw one with 3 right angles. A trapezoid with 2 congruent sides, yes, I can draw that. These 2 sides can be congruent.